The latest live-action Disney Star Wars has been canceled, but we still have the comics. Hey there, today I have a comic book unboxing, and in this video I'm going to open up a set of comics that I won at auction from Infinity Comics on the comic book auction and selling platform Hip Comic. This was a set of books that I won early in 2024 around March, and the majority of these comics that I did win at auction were Star Wars comics. These are comics that are part of that original Marvel Star Wars ongoing series. Originally, it was the adaptation of Episode 4, A New Hope, and then after the adaptation was complete, the series continued and finished with issue 107, technically 108, that came out a little bit later, but 107 original issues of this Marvel comic book series, Star Wars, and always loved going back and picking up issues from this series. And it got me thinking, as time passes and eras change, people change, their tastes change in the entertainment that they consume. I almost feel like the more that these IPs or characters, how they get changed or potentially ruined in some people's opinion, there is a thought that these characters are destroyed or forever broken. And I have to remember that these are fictional characters, these are stories. And while somebody may take a particular character down a path that I don't really understand or appreciate, I can always fall back on those stories and the way that the characters were portrayed and depicted in comic books or movies or any other live action or novels, anything really that I enjoy. Those stories can be self-contained. I really loved these original Star Wars comics for what they were. At the time that I was collecting and trying to read them, maybe I didn't quite understand because I wanted more comics that were related and tied into the movies. Some of the more modern comic books, particularly Star Wars, I think do a great job of kind of filling in some of the gaps between the movies. The current run of Star Wars is currently wrapping up and spilling into Return of the Jedi. And so a lot of that is pretty cool to kind of see a little bit of the backstory and really stretching out the lore of a lot of the stories that I loved, whether it was Star Wars and science fiction or Marvel Comics. And even today, with Spider-Man being taken down a path that I really have no interest in reading, we also have Ultimate Spider-Man, which is, I guess, technically an alternate Spider-Man reality, but it's more closely aligned with the original Spider-Man that I grew up loving and still love today. So I want to get to the unboxing, but I think that for me, when I'm looking at these comics and why do I go back and keep buying them, it's almost to counteract a lot of the negativity when I see new Star Wars properties or Marvel or DC live action that I just can't really get into, I don't enjoy. I often will go back to the things that I do love and get more of it. And I do that as a reminder to myself to say, hey, these stories are always going to be alive and well in your memory, and you can always go back, like looking at a photograph, and read old comic books or watch Episode 4 just like I did over 100 times as a kid. Just because somebody took your beloved characters and changed them in a way that you don't agree with or don't enjoy doesn't mean that those original stories and characters are affected. Honestly, particularly the way I read comics, it's certainly not linear over time. I don't think I could have read every Spider-Man or every Star Wars story in every comic book. So the story of my characters and the stories and properties that I love, and I think it also depends on what we consume, when we consumed the information in the media and the entertainment. A lot of times, if we're consuming bits and pieces of it, then that kind of makes up the story that we know as individuals. So that's part of my love for comic books, is that it allows me to, in a way, kind of choose my own adventure. I love those books as a kid as well, where I can specifically find a run of comics from certain eras that I love, either as a collector or as a reader, and put all of that together to really maximize my enjoyment of the comic book hobby. It's time to unbox these comics so I can show you which comics I picked up at auction from Infinity Comics. Here we go. Okay, here is the shipment that I received from Infinity Comics for the auction wins from March 4th, 2024. Sent USPS priority mail. Anytime I won books at auction from Infinity Comics, as soon as I paid, everything was shipped out the next day, so they're very quick, and everything typically comes packaged very well. So let's go ahead and get this opened up. All right, and the first book in this set of auction wins is not Star Wars. It is nostalgic for me. This is Spider-Man versus Wolverine #1, one of my favorite all-time comics. This was one of the very first comics that I actually just consumed, read multiple times, and took with me everywhere I went, whether we were traveling to read in the car and so forth. And my original copy, because it was enjoyed so much, is not in great shape. And I've been on the lookout for a copy in better condition because I'd like to get it graded and display it. And this was listed on Infinity Comics in near mint condition. I think it does have some corner issues there, just some general slight rounding on the corner, although it's not too bad when you look close up. But definitely down there, there's a little bit of chipping. But the spine, to me, looks really, really nice and much more intact and presentable for what I would call like a collector's copy instead of the reader copy that I have. But anyway, that kind of got in the mix of these Star Wars comics that I won at auction. So let's get to those. And kind of working backward from the issue numbers, this is Star Wars 99. Cover art by Ron Frenz here. One of the things that I noticed with Star Wars comics is there were a lot of really great creators, legendary creators, in fact, that worked on Star Wars comics because of the IP and the license that Marvel had acquired. And so they put a lot of really recognizable, mainstream, and experienced creators on the book. Now, ideally, I would love to have a full run of Star Wars 1 through 108. And the bulk of my collection right now is around 1 through 60. So I'm trying to get some of these higher issue numbers to fill in the full run of Star Wars. Next is Star Wars number 98. And I guess I should point out 99 and 98, both are newsstand copies. At this point, we are well into the direct and newsstand copies being made available. And at this time, the cover art should be fairly recognizable. If you're a Marvel fan of this era, it's Bill Sienkiewicz on cover art. Not somebody that I think about when I think about his art. I don't think about Star Wars. And if I'm thinking about Star Wars, I don't necessarily think of Bill Sienkiewicz. But just like he does, different perspectives, crazy art. We basically have like a stormtrooper here floating in space with the Millennium Falcon and TIE fighters battling in the background. And of course, it's Bill Sienkiewicz, so why not? Then we have Star Wars number 27, so the issue numbers decreasing as I go through these auction wins. Cover art here by Carmine Infantino. And these books are going to be tough with any of these space themes, black background, dark grays, filling out the cover. You're just asking for damage, especially these books were read by collectors of all ages, but certainly by kids. And this wasn't necessarily classified as a kid's book or a kid's series. It definitely had an alignment with the movies, which I know Lucas has said it's made for kids, but I think really to be enjoyed by all ages. But this looks to be in good shape too. Definitely some spine ticks, a couple of color breaking ticks up in here, but all in all, really not bad. Nice high grade copy of Star Wars 27. Next, we have Star Wars number 9. This one is a little bit interesting in terms of first appearances. It is the first appearance of the Cloud Riders on the cover and inside the book in story. The Cloud Riders actually showed up in the Solo, the movie that featured a younger Han Solo. And while not a major key or anything really of significance, it's actually kind of fun that they pulled in a group of characters here from a Star Wars comic with an original story from the late 70s. And if you're wondering who this guy is on the cover, I will tell you here. in a moment, because one of the other issues I won was Star Wars number 8, which is the first appearance of Jackson. You really cannot miss him on the cover, and there he was in issue number 9 as well. But this is always a fun book for me to grab when I can at a good price, because it's pretty wild. You've got Han Solo and Chewbacca, and now Chewbacca's standing there, and as Star Wars fans, we kind of like, we've become accustomed and we accept a giant Wookiee as being part of, a normal display of characters. Like, yeah, that's okay. But then there's Jackson, and you're like, wow, look at that giant green rabbit. So there's a little bit of fun collectability there. And it's been wildly rumored and speculated over the years that Jackson would show up in live action just because he's so recognizable. It would be such a crazy live action character to put a giant talking green rabbit on the screen. Be pretty fun. The last issue of Star Wars that I picked up in this set of books that I won at auction is Star Wars number 5, and just a lot of fun for me to get a single digit issue of Star Wars in high grade. If you are kind of going back in time as a kid and you're picking this up, it certainly has all of the themes there. The Millennium Falcon, the Death Star, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Chewbacca, even the dialogue. It's all very familiar here, as it was to me when I collected these as a kid. And the last book, not a Star Wars book, but one that I had to pick up at auction. This is Strange Tales 156. I've said this in the past. I end up collecting a lot of different Strange Tales books. It's not a series that I seek out, but I love trying to find these books in high grade, and this one looks really, really nice. It does have a little bit of chipping on the top that is losing some color along the top edge here. A little bit of a color break, slight fold, and then some chipping along the top. But I thought that the spine looked really, really good and was held together nicely. And this could be somewhere in maybe the 7 to 8.5 range. 12-cent cover on this Silver Age Marvel comic. And those are the books that I won at auction, definitely dominated here by Star Wars. What I'd like to do now is show you what I ended up bidding on these books to win these high-grade comics at auction from Infinity Comics, and then compare the final bid amount against fair market value. And then also, if I were to get these books graded, what kind of graded fair market value are we looking at, to see if I can add some additional potential value to my collection. So now it's time for the order summary. Here is the summary of the 8 books that I won at auction. I was invoiced $173.82 for these 8 comic books. I paid $10.24 for shipping. I typically like to unlock free shipping wherever I buy comics, but when I do pay for shipping, it's typically from a seller that I regularly buy from. There's a reason that I'm buying from Infinity Comics. There's definitely a lot of upside, and feel like my final bid may be a little bit more in line with fair market value or a little bit under, and so it all kind of offsets and ends up working out. As a California resident, I do have to pay tax, so I had to factor in the cost of shipping plus tax on each book. So the amount column, that is my final bid on the book, but then if I move to the right to display the total cost, that's where the tax and the shipping affects my final cost, and you can see the total here being $173.82, matching the invoice. And I like to track the complete cost to acquire the book door to door, since I primarily buy online and not in person. I like to keep track of those details. Now, just looking at the total cost versus the cover price fair market value, I've added about $37.18 of raw value to my collection. However, there's one book that's affecting these numbers, and that is Spider-Man vs. Wolverine number 1. That book has a fair market value of about $20. And with my final bid and the additional tax and shipping involved, my total cost on that book was $47.73. This is where nostalgia, thinking back of my times of reading comics as a kid, just kind of got the best of me. But also, I really felt like this was a really, really nice high-grade copy. It was a newsstand copy as well. Mine particularly has that bend right by, probably right around the where the price box sits, where you could almost like feel that it's been bent on the spinner rack as people are trying to find comics. And that's the type of condition that my copy is in. And so part of me was like, okay, thinking about the spinner rack, and I still, for some reason, I still remember actually selecting that book It was at a thrifty drugstore. So trying to wait and hold out for that book to try and get it around 20 bucks, I just went ahead and splurged and picked it up. So that one's pulling the overall raw value add down for this order. But for the most part, everything's up. Star Wars number 9 down $3, but just going through them one at a time. Star Wars number 5 paid $23.72. That is a $50 raw book according to cover price, so a nice value add there. Star Wars number 8 paid $18.19 for that book. That's a $32 raw comic according to cover price, first appearance of Jackson. Star Wars number 9 paid $21 versus the $18 fair market value. Star Wars number 27 right around fair market value. Got a pretty good deal on Star Wars 98 at $10.34, as well as Star Wars number 99 at $10.34 as well. That one jumping in value all the way up to 26. Not related to Star Wars, but part of this set of auction wins. Strange Tales 156. I paid $29.75. It is a $35 raw book. So all in all, not bad. Could maybe technically be classified as kind of a break-even type of order. But remember, my total cost still being under cover price fair market value. That includes shipping and tax, as I mentioned. So it's nice to see a lot of these total cost values still being under fair market value. Now, one of the things that I love to do is to kind of plug in the grades of the book to see if it has any value if I were to send the books off to CGC. And for this order, I'm going to plug in the actual advertised condition to see what kind of values we're dealing with if I were to take all of these books in their advertised condition and send them off to CGC for grading as is. So the grades are plugged in based on the advertised condition. So like Star Wars 98 listed as a VF+, so I gave it an 8.5. Not much CGC value for these books in their advertised grades. A loss of $26 if I were to send all of these books off to CGC. And what I mean by the CGC value, that's certainly the fair market value of the comic book graded in that specific grade, but also taking into consideration shipping back and forth and the grading fees. And in some of these cases, if I really wanted a Spider-Man versus Wolverine 9.2 and I paid almost $50 for it raw, I could have just bought it slabbed already for around $50. So these are the kind of things that I have to think about. And certainly here, with it being a negative $21, it's because I paid so much to acquire the book. Now, my initial investment in the book raw also factors into my decision as far as whether or not I should send this book off for cleaning and pressing and then ultimately grading, because this is a book that I may not end up sending in if it really can't be improved beyond a 9.2 because I paid so much to acquire it. Now, I personally just wanted a high-grade copy raw. I am trying to find the best high-grade copy to send in for grading, but maybe this one wasn't it. Maybe it maxes out at 9.6, but then I'd have to compare the 9.6 value against fair market value, plus the grading fees, the pressing fees, and all of that. So all of that I have baked into these formulas that helps me make my decision. But this is just if I were to send all of these books in raw as is. And you can also see as I plug in the conditions, the cover price fair market value also adjusts. So again, a loss of around $9, a loss of $26 if I were to send these books in. So not a ton of upside with these books raw. It was pretty much just kind of a horizontal transaction in terms of value. Now, just for fun, I'd like to plug in the 9.8 grade so you can kind of see the ceiling that I'm dealing with this order, which is always kind of fun. And if all of these books were to come back from CGC as a 9.8, then we're looking at an overall CGC value add of $3,922. Now, I don't believe that all of these books are 9.8 candidates, even after pressing. But what I like to collect are books that do have value in a 9.8, especially the Strange Tales 156 having this extreme value of $3,000, because what that means to me is that there is collectability and desirability of these books in sort of their max grade, obviously not counting 9.9 and 10.0, but 9.8 being the more achievable grade that a collector like me can get or target. Because as that 9.8 value fluctuates, it does affect all of the grades behind it. So I want to make sure that if I'm investing in high grade comics, that there is that potential value in place that helps me kind of make my decision. and influence how I bid on these books. Now, it's certainly possible that some of these could get 9.8 with a clean in press, but because of their age, they're probably more likely to fall back to what their advertised conditions were, or maybe getting a slight grade bump with a clean in press. But all in all, I don't mind winning comics like this, especially for the bids that I place. Like I said, a horizontal transaction in terms of value, that's fine with me. I feel like I did kind of overpay for the Spider-Man versus Wolverine. I think I kind of fell in love with the idea that it could be a 9.8 candidate based on the scans at the time. And certainly in the condition that I have it back, it's certainly possible. It probably maxes out at 9.6, to be honest, looking at the color loss around the bottom corner in particular, but I would still take a 9.6 of that book, especially comparing it to the condition of my reader copy. But very happy with this selection of comics. Star Wars, for me, the original Marvel series, it is something that I would like to collect a full run, but I'm not just trying to buy any issue in any grade just to say I have a full run. I want to have a full run of the comics in the highest grade possible, which I think most collectors would want to have. And it's kind of nice because I already have the early big keys, particularly issue 1 and 2, already slabbed in high grade. And I'm really only missing the first appearance of Boba Fett. That one's going to be a little pricey to acquire, but I'll just keep building the series around that issue and hope to add it down the road. Let me know what you think about these books that I won at auction. Would love to get your comments and stories around what I was talking about earlier in terms of kind of being able to craft your own story and your own narrative and your own ideas and entertainment around specific stories or maybe specific creators that have told those stories. To me, doing that kind of formulates the most ideal representation of a character for you specifically as an individual and allows you to keep your favorite stories and pieces of the lore close to your heart and mind. And I think that's what we do as fans when we kind of take these properties and kind of make it our own. And I find that to be more enjoyable than trying to combat or argue with how these characters and stories are being handled today by modern creators and modern writers. Just go back to the ones that you love and enjoy those. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting, and see you next time.